My name is Ella Thompson, 36 years old, living and working in Seattle. I'm the co-founder of a global health tech company. To the outside world, I'm a successful, independent woman who carries herself with calm confidence. But there's one thing no one knows. My own father once called me and said straight to my face that I shouldn't attend my mother's birthday, because I would embarrass the whole family. 2 months later, during a strategic video meeting with our European partners, I was presenting to the investment board about an AI model used in cancer diagnostics. Just then, my assistant walked in and whispered in my ear, "Someone is here. Says it's urgent. Family matter. Can't wait." I stopped mid-sentence, stepped into the hallway. And there he was, Benjamin, my sister's fiancé. Wearing a suit, fists clenched, eyes wide like he had just uncovered something that shattered his entire world. He bowed his head, voice trembling. "I can't marry her. Not after knowing you're the one they've quietly erased." Have you ever been erased from a family gathering simply because you didn't fit the perfect image they wanted to show the world? If you've ever felt like the only one expected to sacrifice in a family full of expectations and unspoken rules, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe that silence can sometimes be the loudest form of resistance. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me, one I've never dared to tell until now. Because after that day, everything unraveled. The real story was only beginning. I returned to my apartment in the heart of Seattle just before midnight, after nearly 3 weeks on a business trip in Lyon. The moment I set my suitcase down, I picked up the phone to call home out of habit despite the time difference with Boston. It was my mother's birthday, and I had already planned to return earlier than usual. "I've booked my flight. I'll be home next week," I said as the ringing tone filled my ears. My father picked up after several rings. No joy in his voice, not even a greeting. "You shouldn't come this year." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "What did you say?" "I said you shouldn't come. Violet is introducing her boyfriend to the family. He's a lawyer. Comes from a respectable family. His parents will be there too. If you show up, it'll be awkward." "Awkward?" I repeated quietly. "What do you mean?" There was a short pause, then he lowered his voice, speaking as if reading off a report. "You work in tech. It's hard to explain. And your personality, it's not like other people's. If you come, people will have to explain things they shouldn't have to." I stood still by the window, watching the sparse traffic move beneath the misty rain. I didn't speak. I didn't have the chance to. Because right after that, he hung up, just like that, as if the call was only to inform me of something non-negotiable. I sat on the edge of my bed. The room suddenly felt cold. I didn't turn on the lights, just let the warm yellow hue of the bedside lamp glow faintly on the wall. I thought of my mother. She once called me in the middle of the night to ask how to make that radish soup I used to cook. I had transferred money to her when she said the roof needed repairs after a winter storm. Every month, without fail, I covered all the household bills. Electricity, water, insurance, cable, over $2,500, never missing a cent. No one in my family had ever asked, "Ella, how's work been lately?" No one had ever said, "Thank you." But I kept doing it, because I believed it was my duty as a daughter. I opened my laptop, logged into the banking app. In just a few minutes, I canceled every recurring payment I had been maintaining for the past 3 years. Each message popped up. Electricity bill, successfully canceled. Water bill, successfully canceled. Health insurance, successfully canceled. No warning, no confirmation prompt, just silence. The same kind of silence I'd received every holiday when I called and no one picked up. I stood up, poured a glass of cold water, looked into the mirror. I saw myself a woman no longer young, hair pinned neatly back, still in a work shirt. Behind the tired eyes was something quietly fractured. I wasn't angry, I just felt empty. I remembered those childhood evenings sitting on the staircase watching Mom and Violet pick dresses for a party, giggling away. I remembered the family photos hanging in the living room, where I always stood off to the side, hidden behind my two sisters. Violet was always the sociable one, cheerful, charming. She once told me, "You work too much. No one can understand you." She wasn't wrong, but she never tried to understand either. I thought about why my parents didn't want me at the party. It wasn't because I didn't love them. It was because they didn't think I made a good impression. I wasn't the kind of daughter they could brag about. I wasn't the good girl image they wanted to show off at gatherings with cakes and fresh flowers. There's a quiet truth I've tried to deny for years. I was the only one who didn't fit the mold they created for what a family should look like. And that night, when I turned off all the lights in my apartment and lay down on the couch, I knew I had gone too far to ever return to being the good daughter. No one should ever feel like they need permission to come home. No one should feel like a burden just because they live differently. Every month, I sent away thousands of dollars just to maintain a connection that was never acknowledged. But that silence wasn't patience. It was resignation that had reached its limit. And now, they had made their choice. They chose to exclude me from my mother's birthday, a day I had always helped plan, from the menu to the decor, even the cake. I still remembered last year's birthday, when Violet forgot to order the cake on time. I was the one who drove over 40 minutes to get a chocolate cake for Mom. She looked at me and said, like it was the most natural thing in the world, "Good thing you had the time." They thought I had time. They didn't know I had to cancel a virtual investor meeting with a Swiss firm to do that. I chuckled softly, shook my head, then pulled the curtains open. Outside, it was still raining. Spring in Seattle is always damp, but tonight, the rain felt like it could pierce through the glass. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. Because inside me, where pain used to live, there was now just silence. A silence no longer colored by hope. Only clarity remained. For the first time in years, I felt a sharp sense of clarity. And in that moment, I knew that what lay ahead wasn't obligation anymore. It was a choice, and I had made mine. I chose to stop carrying everything in silence. I chose to speak the story they always assumed I'd keep buried. I remembered a winter night when I was 23, freshly graduated from my master's program and offered a research position in Zurich. The whole family was gathered in the living room. The fireplace was glowing. Warm yellow light bathed the framed photos on the wall. Mom was making ginger tea for guests. Dad was reading the paper, as usual. Violet sat cross-legged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone and giggling. I stood in the middle of the room, holding the offer letter printed on thick white paper, heart brimming with excitement. It was an honorary fellowship, full scholarship, with a living stipend more than enough to thrive in Europe. I held the letter out in front of my mother. "Mom, I got in." She glanced at the paper, gave a slight nod. Congratulations. You've always been good at those kinds of things." Then she turned to Aunt Emily, a distant relative from her side of the family, who was sitting next to her. "Violet just agreed to do a photo shoot for the local magazine," Mom said, her voice filled with pride. She wore this red dress, looked just like a Hollywood actress. I stood there, still holding the acceptance letter in my hand, feeling like I was talking to thin air. No one asked anything about the job. No one mentioned that I'd be living abroad by myself. Every gaze drifted toward my sister with her big, gentle eyes and soft, honeyed voice. I wasn't jealous. But I felt small. Growing up, I was the one who handled all the family situations no one wanted to deal with. When Mom got locked out of her online banking and couldn't pay the insurance, I was the one on the phone with customer service for over 2 hours to fix it. When Dad's tax records got mixed up and he was almost fined thousands of dollars, I was the one who drafted the explanation, mailed the letter to the IRS. But all of that, there were no photos, no flowers. No one said beautiful, natural, or impressive. It was quiet work, easy to overlook, easy to take for granted. Violet was different. She had a way of talking that made people feel comfortable. She knew how to tilt her head, smile just right, ask the questions adults wanted to hear. I was never good at that. I didn't know how to pick dresses that were feminine but still stood out. I wore gray button-downs, straight-leg trousers, carried my laptop into meetings, my mind full of data reports. I remember once, Violet said on a live stream that her older sister was always somewhere far away, doing things that sound like science fiction. She laughed. I'm sure she's really smart. But every time she visits, she brings stress, not good vibes. Viewers said she was honest, relatable. I just closed the screen, not out of anger, but because it felt true. In my family, Violet was the one they liked to introduce. I was the one they called when something needed fixing, but avoided mentioning when guests were around. I remember so clearly when I was 28, there was a retirement party for my dad held at a classic Italian restaurant on the south side of the city. I flew in from Zurich, slept just 2 hours before heading straight to the event. I wore a simple black dress, hair tied neatly, minimal makeup. While we were waiting for the main course, I overheard Mom speaking quietly to a guest at the next table. Ella? She does something in healthcare. It's complicated. But she's smart. Also, not the warmest. I turned my head. She hadn't realized I was sitting less than an arm's length away. I didn't react. Just picked up my napkin, folded it, and kept eating as if I hadn't heard a thing. But I remembered every word. That comment felt final, like a stamp sealing my place in the family. Smart but cold. Useful but distant. Good enough to rely on but never soft enough to be loved. Like a normal daughter. After that dinner, when I offered to cover part of the table reservation, Mom refused, but with a calculating tone. No need, just take care of your plane ticket. Violet covered this from her last promo campaign. She's doing really well, I nodded. But I still wired money to the restaurant later, quietly covering the remainder once I realized Violet hadn't paid the full amount. I used to think if I just tried harder, if I were a little more patient, maybe they would finally see me. But some people will never really want to see you, they only want to keep you where they boxed you in long ago. A useful older sister. Nothing more, nothing less. Everything started to change when I decided not to go back anymore. No more birthday visits for Mom, no more paying the March power bill. No more comforting Violet when she cried because her boyfriend didn't trust her. I didn't rebel, I just stopped serving. That silence wasn't anger. It was a calm refusal after years of not being seen as a whole daughter. I chose clarity. And in that clarity, I found myself standing taller, with no guilt, asking no permission. That data privacy conference in San Diego brought together almost every big name in healthcare tech and law. I was invited as the keynote speaker for the afternoon session, focused on ethical artificial intelligence in public health. The speech was under 20 minutes. But I had spent the entire week refining every word to be sharp, precise, and accessible to those without technical backgrounds. I didn't know that among the hundreds sitting in the audience, there was one familiar face I had never met. Or maybe I had, in a way, through the family photo Mom awkwardly sent me last Christmas. Your sister didn't send anything? She's just busy all the time. I didn't reply to that message. I didn't even look closely at the photo of Violet and her new boyfriend. Just noticed a man in a dark suit, arm, around my sister's shoulder, confident and charming, and thought nothing more. After the presentation, I sat in the guest lounge, waiting for the roundtable session. A young man walked in carrying a black leather folder, scanning the room as if looking for someone specific. Excuse me, he stopped in front of me. Are you Ella Thompson? I nodded and stood to shake his hand. A firm, professional handshake, not too tight, not too soft. His hand was warm, steady. I'm Benjamin Harris, legal counsel from Weller and Byrne. I listened to your presentation earlier. Very compelling. Rare to hear someone frame AI ethics through a sociological lens like that. Thank you, I replied gently, though my guard was still up, used to strangers approaching too quickly. Weller and Byrne is well known. I read an article your team published on data rights in rare cancer treatment. Benjamin smiled, visibly surprised. Didn't expect that. I co-wrote that piece with a colleague. Actually, I've also been following some of the work your company Pacific MedTech is doing, especially your AI model for community-based genetic analysis. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked him directly in the eyes. long enough to see they weren't fake, deep enough to feel his compliment wasn't just small talk. Benjamin didn't look at me like I was some older woman to be intimidated by. He looked at me as an equal, a colleague he genuinely respected. We kept talking for nearly 10 minutes. The conversation drifted from security concerns to legal barriers in public research. No one mentioned family. No one said anything about Boston. No one brought up Violet. I had no idea this was Benjamin, the man who, just a few months later, would become my sister's fiancé. Honestly, even if he had said his full name then, I probably would have just nodded politely and ended the conversation earlier than usual. I had no interest in family side paths anymore. But I didn't say, and I didn't ask. When the conference ended, we shook hands again shorter. I nodded. "Hope we'll get to collaborate sometime in the future," he replied. "I'm sure we will." Then I turned, pulled my laptop case behind me, and walked out of the conference hall, already thinking about the report I needed to finish before the Zurich team meeting. The flight back to Seattle that night was delayed due to weather. I sat by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass, and quietly thought to myself that short conversation with Benjamin made me feel strangely at ease. I'm not the kind of person who pays attention to strangers, but in that neutral space, where there was no mother, no father, no judgmental relatives, I could simply be myself. And Benjamin in that moment was just a curious and respectful colleague. We stood in front of each other like two people with no shared past. No one could have predicted that just a few weeks later, we would meet again. But this time, we weren't strangers at an international conference. I was the woman who'd been excluded from family gatherings because I was hard to introduce. And he was the one they had carefully prepared for a perfect first impression. At the time, I had no idea. And I also didn't know that my silence that day would later become the tremor that shattered every facade my family had built. About a month after the conference in San Diego, I returned to my usual work routine at headquarters in Seattle. Meetings lined up back to back. New collaboration proposals from Switzerland and Japan arrived weekly, and I spent most of my time in my office with glass walls overlooking the street, where spring afternoons still carried that familiar light chill. That morning, I opened an email from HR titled, "Recommended Candidate, Global Legal Advisor Position." I clicked in, expecting nothing special. The role had been open for nearly 3 weeks, and none of the say-so. Previous applicants had really stood out. I skimmed through the attached resume. Candidate name, Benjamin Harris, age, 33, current location, Boston education, Harvard Law, specializing in commercial law and healthcare data security, experience, Weller and Byrne, senior legal consultant languages, English, French. Note from the HR director, previously met at a healthcare conference, strong first impression. Potential for leading global legal initiatives. I paused. I reread the name a second time. Benjamin Harris. Not exactly a rare name. But this resume, the credentials, the experience, the city, every detail aligned. I opened the attached headshot. It was taken in a professional studio, charcoal gray suit, white shirt, navy tie. Handsome, polished, and well put together. No doubt about it. It was the same man who had shaken my hand in San Diego. The same man who appeared in the few photos my mother had reluctantly sent standing next to Violet, holding hands, under the golden Boston afternoon light. I didn't feel angry or shaken. I just sat quietly for a few seconds, staring at the screen, then calmly typed a short internal note in the review column. Previously met and had professional exchange. Demonstrates strong legal reasoning. Recommend for in-person interview at Seattle HQ. I didn't protest, didn't call my mother, didn't text Violet. I simply approved, like any manager would for a qualified applicant. Because in my work, I don't carry personal emotions. And because, if fate decided Benjamin would walk through this door, I would let the truth speak for itself. Not through words, but through position. A week later, I received confirmation from HR that Benjamin had accepted the in-person interview. It was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 o'clock, in my office. I arrived early, as usual. Made myself a strong black coffee, then spent about 15 minutes reviewing the previous quarter's legal department reports. At 9:58, my assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Benjamin Harris is here, waiting in the lobby." I nodded and set my coffee cup down. "Send him in." The door opened. I looked up. Benjamin's eyes met mine for barely a second, but I saw his reaction clearly surprise, then shock, and finally, discomfort. I sat upright, voice calm. "Good morning, Mr. Harris. Please, have a seat." He stepped in, gripping his portfolio tightly, and sat across from me. Unlike our casual handshake in San Diego, this time he sat still, hands clasped over his knees, eyes scanning me like he was trying to make sense of something impossible. "Ella," he spoke softly. I didn't let him finish. I opened the folder on my desk, nodding slightly. "Your resume is impressive. Your background shows you're a strong fit for what we're looking for. But before we dive into the technical aspects, I want to clarify something. You knew who I was at, least after seeing the interview invite. Why did you still decide to come?" Benjamin took a deep breath, his voice lowered, genuine. "Because I wanted to know who you really are." I didn't smile, didn't react, and now you do. He nodded slowly. "You're the one Violet never really talked about, the one your family said wasn't worth mentioning much." I raised an eyebrow. "Because I'm hard to introduce?" Benjamin didn't answer. His eyes dropped briefly to the floor. Then he looked up again, more direct. "I think I thought I knew a lot, but really I knew nothing." I closed the folder and slid it gently toward him. "Then, let's start over. This is a job interview, not a family introduction. If you want this position, I expect competence, not personal entanglement." Benjamin nodded, with more certainty. "I understand. And I'm ready." That was all I needed. I updated the internal system, qualified. Handled unexpected situation, professionally. Recommend approval. After he left, I walked to the glass window. Below, people were going about their day, unaware that a quiet truth had just surfaced. No yelling, no tears, no confrontation, just a glance, a title, and an identity my family had long ignored, now impossible to deny. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth. And the truth had just knocked on their door wearing a tailored suit, carrying a flawless resume, and calling me boss. My mother's birthday fell on the first Saturday of April. That day in Seattle, the sky was overcast, and the wind was colder than usual for spring. I got up early as always, made myself a cup of strong black coffee, and opened my laptop to check the board meeting schedule on Zoom at 9 a.m. It was an important meeting about the next investment round from Atlantic Ventures. Just as I logged into the meeting platform, my phone started buzzing. A text, then another. In under a minute, I had 5 missed calls, all from the same number, my mother. I didn't rush to check them. My fingers kept typing up a performance email. When the meeting began, I glanced down at my phone again. A message from Mom stood out. "Ella, the power's out. Can you check what's going on for us?" I set the phone aside and turned back to the computer screen, where the head of investments was presenting quarterly profit graphs. In my ears were discussions about growth rates, but in my mind, there was just stillness, not anger, just familiarity, a kind of repetition that no longer surprised me. Less than 10 minutes later, another message came from my father. "No water, no Wi-Fi. Call the service company now." And then from Violet, "The internet's down. Over 30 guests are on the way. You need to get this fixed fast. Mom's about to cry." Each line felt urgent, pushing responsibility toward me like it was second nature. No greeting. No checking in on what I was doing. No one. I remembered that I had been explicitly barred from coming back. No one mentioned that I was excluded from today's celebration because I wasn't presentable. I hit mute on the laptop, picked up my phone, and quietly read through the messages one by one. All commands. Not a single, "Are you okay?" Not one apology for the cold call last month. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlaced, looking out the tall window. Seattle was still dreary, like a watercolor painting blurred by rain. And across the country, in the house with the white fence I'd grown up in, the lights were off, the water had stopped running, the internet was gone. A house I'd supported with scheduled money transfers for the past 3 years, now spiraling into chaos on the very day they'd chosen to exclude me from the family. I didn't text back. I didn't call. The meeting stretched until almost noon. When I wrapped up my presentation, the clock was close to 12. The coffee was cold. My phone screen kept lighting up with new messages. I opened one from Mom. "Ella, please, we're still family." I froze for a second. I kept rereading that phrase. Still family. I thought about blood, the kind I shed staying up for nights, finalizing our first public hospital contract. I thought about the sweat I poured into paying off their bills for 3 straight years. I thought about the evenings I typed disbursement emails to Mom while they all sat around the dinner table together. And now, when I was no longer the one footing the bill, I was reminded I was still family. I put the phone down and opened the finance report from accounting. Just then, a voice message came through from Aunt Carol, the only relative who still spoke to me normally, without schemes or conditions. Her raspy voice came through the speaker. "Ella, your mom's overwhelmed. The power's been out since morning. The stove's down. No internet. Guests are showing up soon. Everyone's flustered. I don't know what happened between you and your dad, but today's bad." I didn't reply. I didn't delete the message either. I just let it sit there. I went back to work, letting the sound of typing drown out the stream of incoming notifications. My mind wasn't on the party anymore. It was on the way my mother had looked at me over Violet's shoulder. On the last thing my father ever said to me on the phone, "You shouldn't show up when the family needs to keep a clean image." And now, that image was unraveling. 30 guests, including friends of Benjamin, who now worked under me, were attending a party with no lights, no water, no internet. All things that had been maintained steadily for 3 years, because of me. I picked up my key card from the desk and walked into the next meeting with the head of market development. My mind was clear. Everything made sense. Half an hour later, when I stepped out, my phone lit up again. A message from Violet. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? How can you be so cold?" Mom nearly passed out from crying. "Benjamin can't call a cab because there's no internet. The house is pitch dark. Everyone knows something's wrong. Everyone's asking, 'Where's Ella?'" I held the phone in my hand. My eyes lingered on those last 4 words. "Where's Ella?" I didn't respond. But I knew that question wasn't meant to blame anymore. It was the beginning of a doubt they had never dared to face. For the first time, my absence created a void so large they couldn't cover it up with excuses. They had to face the truth. The things that had seemed to just work were the result of what I had quietly given. And now that I had stopped, they had no idea how to cope. Around 3 p.m., just as I wrapped my 3rd meeting of the day, my phone unexpectedly rang, a video call from Aunt Carol. I hesitated. She never used video unless it was serious. I looked out the window. Seattle was still misting, the sky draped in a worn-out gray. I tapped to accept the call. The screen lit up with the image of the childhood home I had lived in for nearly 20 years, but now it looked like a stage of chaos. Aunt Carol stood in the middle of the living room, holding the phone sideways. Behind her were flickering candle lights, a long table draped in white linen but empty. A few guests gathered, looking confused and uneasy. Somewhere off camera, my mother's voice pierced the air, sharp and strained. "Is the internet still down? Why can't we call anyone?" Aunt Carol moved the phone closer and whispered, "Ella, do you know what's happening right now?" I didn't answer. I just watched the screen, where someone had just stepped into the room from the hallway. He was tall, upright, his gray suit still crisp despite what must have been a long day. I recognized that walk and that face, even before he turned toward the camera. Benjamin Harris. I watched his eyes scan the room, taking in the faces he must have just met this morning. But it wasn't until his gaze landed on Aunt Carol's phone that he froze in place. Ella, Thompson? He said quietly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I nodded slightly. I didn't say a word. People in the background started turning to look at him. Some whispered too low to hear, but their eyes gave it away. They sensed something. Benjamin swallowed hard, then looked at my father, then my mother, then Violet, who was standing near the big candle by the window, clutching her wine glass. Benjamin said, his voice steadier now. She's the CEO of the company I just joined. She's the one I report to directly. The room went silent, as if all the sound had been drained out. No more footsteps, no more whispers. Even my mother's voice came to an abrupt stop. I saw Violet's face fall, her eyes wide with surprise. The wine glass in her hand tilted slightly, nearly spilling. I kept my face calm, showing nothing but a faint smile. Enjoy the party. Then I ended the call. My room returned to stillness. The rain tapped softly against the window pane. I stared at the blank screen, feeling neither light nor heavy. Just a moment enough for everything long hidden in the shadows to be exposed under the light. I set the phone down on the desk, pulled a small notepad from the drawer, and jotted down a few notes for tomorrow's meeting. But only minutes later, the phone screen lit up with a new message. It was from Violet. You knew from the start, didn't you? You knew Benjamin was my fiancé, and still you stayed silent? How could you let this happen right in the middle of Mom's party? Do you even know she hasn't stopped crying since? I didn't reply right away. I made myself a cup of ginger tea, threw a blanket over my legs, and settled into the chair by the window. Outside, Seattle was still raining. Harder now, longer, like someone was washing the dust off a painting that had been hidden too long. About an hour later, I checked my phone again. Another message from Violet had come in. Benjamin's not saying anything. He says he needs time to think. Everyone's looking at me like I did something wrong. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? I stared at the message. I read it 3 times, then set the phone down again, not rushing to respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I didn't step in. I just stood still and let the truth do the rest. I didn't ruin the party. I didn't show up. I didn't tell Benjamin who I was to them. I didn't ask anyone to reveal anything. I was simply the last person they thought of until they needed someone to keep things running. And when I stepped away, that shining house fell into chaos on the very day they thought would be flawless. Maybe that was the truest mirror of all. Not revenge, just a reflection. A chance for them to ask, who really kept those walls from collapsing? Benjamin didn't call again that night. Violet didn't text anymore either. And I sat in a room with no phone calls, no voices shouting my name, no demands, no one asking me to fix anything. I didn't feel joy, but I felt peace, a silence that wasn't cold or heavy. Just right. Like for once, I was standing exactly where I belonged, in a house no one built for me, no one controlled, no one could hide behind. That night, after wrapping up a long workday, I sank into my familiar armchair by the window, hands cradling the still warm cup of tea. Outside, the Seattle sky no longer poured rain, but the clouds hung low and thick. The whole city felt like it was holding its breath, just like me. The phone buzzed again, a new message from Violet. A short sentence bursting with anger. You ruined my engagement. You knew exactly what Benjamin would say when he saw you, and still you kept silent. What did you want to humiliate me? I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt either. I read the message once, then set the phone down. Just as I was getting up to pour more tea, it lit up again from my mother. Ella, you shouldn't have turned everything into some ridiculous performance. My day. A family party, and now it's all a joke in front of our friends, just because you wanted to prove something. I never thought you'd choose to do this. I looked at the message, felt my heartbeat slow, calm. They still didn't get it, or maybe they didn't want to. I didn't create a show. I just stopped staying behind the curtain. And my presence, even through a simple call, was enough to unravel every role they had tried so hard to assign. I didn't reply. The clock ticked past 10 p.m. I opened my laptop to review the Canadian partnership draft. We had a virtual meeting the next day, but my mind couldn't fully focus. I never let personal matters interfere with work, but tonight, something inside me had shifted. A chime echoed from my email inbox. I opened it. Sender, Benjamin Harris. Subject, apologies. I took a deep breath and clicked it open. The message wasn't long, but each line felt carefully chosen, respectfully written. Ella, I know no words can make up for today, but I still want to offer my sincerest apology. I had no idea who you were to that family. I never imagined that the woman I admire at work, the strong, visionary leader I once thought of as a role model, was the very person they had been hiding all along. I ended things with Violet tonight, not just because of what happened today, but because I realized I'd built something on dishonesty without even realizing it. I'm sorry for unintentionally hurting you. I truly respect you, not just as a boss, but as a human being. Benjamin. I read the email again and again, not looking for flaws, but trying to understand because maybe someone from the outside had seen the full picture of the life I'd been forced to live. I opened the reply tab, typing slowly and gently. Benjamin, you don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stumbled upon a truth that no one ever told you. What you felt today is what I've lived through for most of my life. I'm not angry, and I hope you keep moving forward with the clarity and self-respect you showed tonight. Thank you for not looking away when you saw what was hidden. Ella. I sent the email, then closed the laptop. The only sound left in the room was the ticking of the clock and the soft golden glow from the desk lamp. Sometime after 11 p.m., another message from Violet appeared. Benjamin's gone. He turned off his phone. I don't know where he is. What did you say to make him change like that? Are you happy now? Mom is still crying. I stared at the screen. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt one thing. Violet had never asked me a single question about how I felt. Not once. She cried only when she lost something she wanted. But I had lost my place in the family long ago, and not one tear had ever been shed for me. I typed back a single line short, not cruel. I didn't do anything. Things fall apart when no one's left to carry the weight of the lies. There was no reply. I stood up and stepped onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, but the air was still cold. I threw on an extra sweater and wrapped my hands around the now cold cup of tea. The city at night was eerily quiet. I wondered where Benjamin might be sitting right now, what he might be thinking. But then I let the thought drift away. I didn't need to know anything more, because I don't live to be explained. I live to exist fully. And now, I've started to do just that. Quietly. Without fanfare. No validation needed, but it's real. And enough. 2 weeks after the chaotic birthday event, I came home from a meeting with the product development team downstairs to find the doorbell ringing. On the video screen was a sight I had avoided for years. My parents standing side by side. My mother wore a dark beige coat, holding a canvas bag, her eyes sunken, face exhausted. My father still wore his gray trench coat, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in his pockets, his face stern and tense like he was attending a serious board meeting. I opened the door without saying a word. We stared at each other in a long silence. Are you busy? My mother asked, her voice thin as a strained thread. I stepped aside to let them in. There was no hug, no warm greeting. Just two people who once called me a burden, now standing inside the space I had built for myself. I poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the table. They sat across from me, keeping a polite distance, like guests from another world. My mother spoke first, as if rehearsed before they arrived. The family. After what happened, we're really exhausted. Your father's blood pressure has been high for days. I haven't been able to sleep. People are whispering all kinds of things. And Violet, she's still not okay. I nodded slightly, not interrupting. My eyes were on my mother, but my ears listened for my father. He stayed silent, but I could see his hands lightly clenching on his lap. To be honest, my mother continued, I know you've helped a lot over the years, but the family's really struggling right now. Violet seeing a therapist? We all need some stability again. I sat up straighter, fingers interlaced on the table. You mean, you want me to resume financial support? My father cleared his throat and spoke in place of my mother. We didn't come here to beg. We're family, and families should get through tough times together. I didn't respond right away. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a thin folder, and returned to the table. Opening it, I slid out a printed document from the week before. A simple financial agreement, I said calmly. If you need me to support you again with $2,500 a month like before, I'm willing, but I have two conditions. My mother looked at me, brow furrowing slightly. First condition, Violet has to sign as well, agreeing to contribute at least 50% each month. That means $1,250. I'll cover the rest. My father leaned forward, voice dropping lower. She just had her engagement called off. She's unemployed. She doesn't have the means. I raised my hand gently to cut him off. I'm not forcing anyone, but if Violet can't participate, then I'll have to decline as well. I flipped the page and presented the second condition. Second, in the event of your passing, all assets, including the house in Boston, will go to me, clearly stated. Signed, notarized. My mother looked as if the air had been sucked out of her. Her hands trembled slightly. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. What are you doing, Ella? We're family. Is this how you treat your parents? I didn't bow my head. I didn't raise my voice. No, Dad. This is how I establish boundaries after years of living by obligation. If you see raising a daughter as an investment that now needs repayment, then let's do the math clearly. I paused, locking eyes with him. But if this is about family, then it must come with respect and fairness. My mother turned to my father, her voice starting to waver. Maybe we should talk this over at home. Ella, you're being too firm. I stood and walked to open the door. I'm not being firm, Mom. I'm just tired. Tired of having to pay for a place in the home I once called my own. Tired of every visit from you ending in a bill. My father didn't get up immediately. He looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. Then he turned away, his voice still heavy. If you live this coldly, who will be by your side in the end? I watched him walk through the doorway and replied softly, I don't need anyone beside me just because they're used to treating me like a backup plan. The door closed behind them. I didn't lock it. I simply leaned lightly against it, listening to the footsteps fade down the hallway. What I felt wasn't a void, but a space finally rearranged, tidy, in order. I stepped into the kitchen, made a warm lemon water, and returned to my desk. The contract was still there, neatly laid out. At the bottom, a simple line remained unsigned. If family isn't enough to keep promises, then let principle do it. 3 months passed since that cold and tense meeting with my parents in my apartment. Since that day, no messages, no calls. No more guilt trips, no more veiled requests I'd grown used to facing year after year. Everything. Cut off like the final string unfastened from my wrist, light and unmistakable. I was living on my own schedule and breath. No more evenings abruptly interrupted by texts like, "Can you send us 300 real quick? I'll pay you back by the end of the month." No more midnight calls from Violet asking me to call a washing machine repair service on the other side of the city while I was literally across the ocean. I couldn't even recall how long I had lived in that state of needed when convenient, forgotten when inconvenient. Now everything was quiet. Not because people had changed, but because I had chosen to stop reacting. I still went to work as usual, still joined international investor meetings in the early morning, and kept my calendar full enough not to listen to the silence. But even when no one touched my life anymore, I didn't feel lonely. On the contrary, I felt healed. Like a wound that had bled for years had finally stopped, even if no one ever apologized for causing it. One Friday afternoon, Seattle was lightly foggy as I drove toward the suburbs to visit a small research center our company was sponsoring in its early phase. On the way back, the car's dashboard warned of low fuel, forcing me to pull into a gas station along the highway. The station was small and nearly empty. I parked next to pump number 3, got out, and pulled my coat tighter as the wind picked up. While entering my credit card code, I caught a glimpse from the corner of my eye, someone stepping out of the nearby convenience store. The face was thinner, the skin pale under a worn gray sweater. Her once polished hair now hung loosely, messy. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were unfocused, like someone waking from a long dream, still unsure of the real world. It was Violet. She recognized me almost at the same moment. Her steps froze, still holding an unopened bottle of water. Neither of us said anything. No, hi. No, I'm sorry. We stood about 13 feet apart, each of us in a completely different life. She was the one who finally spoke. I understand. Now. Her voice was raspier than it used to be. No longer the high, cheerful tone she used in skincare live streams. No longer the sweet voice that once melted into a fake giggle as she called out, "I'm the baby of the family. Mom has to spoil me." Right in the middle of dinner. I didn't respond. No nod. No shake of the head. Just waited for the next sentence. But it's too late now, isn't it? I looked straight into her eyes. Something had shattered in them, but there was no resentment anymore. No demands. Just the exhaustion, the emptiness of someone realizing they were never the center of the life they thought they owned. I nodded, gently, without blame, without bitterness, and maybe that was the only answer she truly deserved at that moment. We said nothing else. She walked back to her car, a worn-out old sedan with peeling paint on the passenger door. I returned to the gas pump and placed my hand on the handle. In that moment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I no longer carried the burden of being the older sister who had to hold everything together. I had walked through the darkness without needing anyone to lead me, and I no longer waited for someone to look back and apologize. I had come far enough that when I looked behind me, all I saw was calm, no urge to fix the past, no desire for revenge. Just a choice to stop offering pieces of myself to relationships that only needed my hand, not my heart. The tank was full. I closed the cap, got in the car, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Violet's car still hadn't started. She sat motionless, staring forward. She didn't look back. I didn't know what she was thinking. But I knew one thing clearly: I was no longer there. No longer the one ready to bow my head just for a spot in the house I once called home. I didn't need to be accepted. I didn't need pity. I just needed peace with myself and with the truth. And in that silence, I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting everything that happened. Forgiveness is when you no longer let it shape the rhythm of your heartbeat, when you can look at the person who hurt you and feel no urge for them to pay. You just let them go and keep living. I drove away from the gas station without looking back, but inside, I felt light as if a chain had broken without me needing to pull. And when the wind crept in through the window I hadn't fully closed, I smiled, gripped the wheel gently, and let my heart move forward. I sat in a familiar corner cafe, where the windows always misted over on chilly mornings and the clink of spoons against ceramic cups sounded like soft background music for those who preferred quiet. In front of me was a steaming cappuccino. Beside it, a thick folder neatly clipped in a dark brown leather binder, its top page stamped clearly. Strategic Partnership, Oak Ridge Fund and Pacific Genomics. The investment amount was $50 million, but that wasn't what made me open the folder that morning. It was a short, handwritten note from the partner fund's director. "We're not just investing in technology. We believe in the person leading it." I gently touched the word believe. Not everyone understands what it feels like to spend half your life trying to prove you're worth listening to. But I did it not for the outside world, but for the people who should have understood me back when I was a child. I used to think success would make them love me more, make them proud, but I was wrong. Now, sitting here on a quiet Monday morning, with signed contracts resting neatly beside a coffee cup, surrounded by strangers who weren't witnesses to my years of silent effort, I finally felt enough. Not bursting with joy, not overwhelmed with sadness, just a slow peace flowing through every vein, making me sit a little longer, breathe a little softer, and see the world without the blur of hope and waiting. The cafe. Door opened. A breeze rolled in, carrying sunlight and the scent of toasted waffles. An elderly couple walked in hand, speaking softly. They ordered the same pastry, sat across from each other, not needing to ask what the other was thinking. I watched them for a while, then looked back at the space in front of me. I didn't feel envy or regret. I just realized that some relationships are built on choice, while others, what we call family, sometimes are just labels without kindness. I used to believe family meant a place you could return to, no matter how badly you'd failed. But in reality, I did go back many times. And each time, I had to try harder to be more acceptable, more presentable, more willing to quietly pay for someone else's emptiness. In the end, I didn't choose to leave because I was hurt again. I chose to leave because I no longer fit that role. True family doesn't come from shared blood. It comes from mutual respect. From being able to call someone just to ask, "Are you okay?" Not just to say, "Send mom some money." I learned to stop at the right time. Stop before the good things in me were drained to fill someone else's void. Stop so I could live without bowing my head. Stop so I no longer had to explain or prove my worth. My phone buzzed. A short email from Benjamin. Today was my first quarterly presentation at Pacific Genomics. Our team did well. Thank you for believing in me and giving me a chance to move forward. Not everyone can separate the past from the present like you do. I didn't respond right away. I just smiled. Sometimes, the people who once stood among those who hurt you are the only ones brave enough to face the truth. And when that happens, you don't need to reply with forgiveness or closeness. Just hold the right distance enough to respect, enough to keep walking. The waitress brought over a glass of water, placing it beside me politely. "Would you like anything else?" I shook my head and smiled. "No, thank you. I'm good." As she walked away, I looked around again. A group of college students was laughing nearby. A middle-aged man typed quietly on his laptop. A young mom rocked her baby while texting on her phone. Each had their own story, and so did I. But the difference was, I had written the ending of an old chapter, in silence. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because I knew words wouldn't change anything if the listener never tried to understand. And silence, when needed, is the clearest act. A powerful declaration without a single word. I looked outside, where sunlight had begun to spread across the stone pavement. Maybe I'd go home early today. Maybe I'd cook a simple dinner, play an old song, and call a friend to share something trivial. And maybe I'd sleep well not because I won, but because I stopped losing to myself. I wonder, if you were me, would you have done it differently? Would you have kept quiet just to maintain surface peace? Or would you have stopped without anger, without resentment, just because you were too tired of playing a role you never chose? I don't expect everyone to agree with my choice. We each have our own way of loving, enduring, and drawing the line. But if you've ever felt like you're only valued when you're useful, only heard when someone needs something, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I stepped out of that circle. Because sometimes, love isn't enough. There has to be fairness, kindness, and honesty too. What about you? What do you think? Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Have you ever used silence to protect yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you, not just to understand, but so that you feel seen and acknowledged, the way I longed for all those years. And if stories like this speak to you about family, difficult choices, and finding your voice, consider following the channel. There are still so many layers of life waiting to be told, in a voice that may be quiet, but strong enough to reach hearts that have been bruised by the word family. We will find peace, though the road there may differ for each of us. But sometimes, all it takes is one story at the right moment to be the first light toward an escape. Thank you for listening to mine.